Greetings. This is Margaret Manning at Cal State Dominguez Hills, and we're going to talk about the environment. And I have two wonderful ladies who are authorities on environmental justice and injustice, and they've been carrying the banner for a long time. Florence has a background working at the California EPA, and Cynthia has made a life's work looking after the little people in the Del Amo. Straighten your t-shirt in the Del Amo Montrose EPA Superfund sites. And we're going to address an issue that has made news for quite a while, the Porter Ranch, the methane gas that escaped from underneath the gated community. And we've noticed that they received speedy attention from the California political hierarchy, and it triggered comparisons with other neighborhoods in the Los Angeles County which have suffered air pollution for many, many years. And so I'm going to leave it to you to bring up the comparisons and tell us about other areas that are not as fortunate as Porter Ranch.
Well, I think
Cynthia.
that some of the comparisons are the obvious comparisons that people who live in these low-income communities of color, environmental justice, or injustice communities make. It's to do with your race, Porter Ranch, mostly white, your economic status, fairly high income as opposed to low-income communities, and then what you said, their political clout. I believe I've heard that a congressperson actually lives in the Porter Ranch area. But I think one of the other distinctions that is about Porter Ranch is the fact that sometimes the contamination that burdens our communities, that's in the groundwater, for instance, or in the air, you can't always see. And so there's this perception that if you can't see it, it can't harm you. And one of the things that we noticed right off the bat with the news media coverage on Porter Ranch was that there are tools out there that if you can get a hold of them, like the screening of the XRF, I think it was, where you could actually see the vapors coming up out of the ground. And weren't we all aghast, even those of us who have been working to protect our communities for decades, but you could see it. It became something more tangible. Okay. And I think that's what we really have to try and work on for our own communities, because it was so out of balance, even though you could see the contamination, that this high affluent white community was getting all this attention, that I've heard from many different people, it's not necessarily those that are doing the work in the communities that are screaming, hey, look at the injustice here. It's been so outrageous that I've heard from heads of the EPA, I've heard from heads of other organizations that just work on that. They've done editorials basically bringing up the fact, what about these other communities that have been struggling for decades to be heard? Why is there such an injustice? It's almost like a slap in the face. And of course we don't want anybody to suffer. It's not like, oh, let those affluent people over there suffer and they'll see how we like it. Of course not. But it's just really a slap in the face to the people who really may have language barriers or don't have that political clout, or basically just trying to make ends meet and don't even really know what's going on. They believe that there are people out there that are being paid to protect them, and those people are doing their jobs, and that certainly is not always the case, and I don't think it was the case here. And I think it's going to be very hard for some of these people to leave the relocation area, which is what we would like for our community to be relocated, when they find that their health is improving. That's really, I think, the proof in the pudding.
Okay. Florence, you want to weigh in on this discussion?
Well, my issue with Porter Ranch is somewhat different in that I actually worked on another project, Playa Vista, which is in the Marina del Rey area, which represented a number of threats to people's welfare. including the presence of petroleum and old wells that were used to pump petroleum, waste from the Howard Hughes helicopter manufacturing facility, and naturally occurring methane gas at very high levels, where every building that's built in Playa Vista has methane gas warning systems. And underneath all of that is a natural gas reservoir maintained by the gas company. And I'm very concerned that something like this could happen in that area, and the consequences could be very serious. In the case of Porter Ranch, why did it have to leak before anyone did anything to prevent that kind of a release? And that is one of the things that troubles me deeply about the way we do business right now. When the ExxonMobil refinery had an explosion, we find out after that explosion that sitting next to that equipment are tanks of very dangerous acid that, had those tanks been damaged, the release of that acid could have killed people. And I'm deeply concerned about a site that's near our Del Amo Montrose site, Montrose Chemical, where they have tanks of chlorine gas at very high levels. Chlorine gas is extremely toxic to humans. So I would like our government to be watchful so that something like Porter Ranch doesn't happen. And I could appreciate the concerns of that community. I also believe there was a striking difference between the way the politicians and the government agencies responded to the Porter Ranch situation as to be compared with the way they respond to issues that we bring up in our communities. And I don't think that's right.
Okay.
I think that equality is important. And I think I'm not suggesting, I believe strongly the dangers associated with the methane gas release at Porter Ranch were probably much more severe than we even realize. But again, I think the government should be watchful and doing what can be done to prevent something like that happening, rather than coming in after it's already going on.
Now, Cynthia made a very good point that I hadn't thought about, was that these gases are not visible, and often these toxins are in the ground and they are not visible. So how can we, as environmentalists, make these problems more visible in areas like Vernon with the Exide battery, or the Del Amo area, and the ports area, Wilmington, for example?
One of the things that, I don't know if it's exactly from the Porter Ranch incident, but I know it's been a lot of talk in the environmental justice area, is trainings on how to use these tools. They're very expensive, but you know, if people pool their resources, I know that the Department of Toxic Substance Control just set on a notice that they were doing a training for the Boyle Heights area and how to use this equipment. So we will be asking that they step out and do some trainings for our area as well. But I think people have to remain vigilant. There's this perception that we're living in a time when we have pristine air, when we have pristine water. We've thrashed our planet. Our planet may not make it. I think that's why it's so important for us to be speaking with you today, because we're speaking to the next generation. And we're hoping that there's going to be enough left of the planet that they can, you know, keep going on this course that we're trying to chart. You know, when I saw the news coverage on Porter Ranch and it was showing somebody with a bloody nose, we don't want anybody to be exposed to contamination where you actually can see blood coming from your nose. That means that the membranes inside your nose have been penetrated and burnt out. But also the first thing that came to my mind as well was, that's the first thing that brought to our attention, my husband and I, that there was a problem in our community. I noticed in the trash can there were bloody tissues. And I had been having a bloody nose, but they weren't my tissues. And I asked him, has your nose been bleeding? And so sometimes people don't pick up on these signs, and that is a very visible sign as well. We've been fighting in our community for the last, I think I just did a timeline on it, since 2009, when the new regional administrator for EPA came on board to do vapor intrusion testing in our homes, because our groundwater in Del Amo Montrose is so contaminated that there's pure product floating on top of it. And in our area, unlike a lot of areas, our groundwater is rising, so that means the contamination is coming closer to the homes. Not only is it coming closer, but the soil that's in between the groundwater and our homes is getting smeared with these tar-like substances. And so that's just going to keep vaporizing and vaporizing. And the response that we get from the EPA is, we have to wait all this time. They just did the first sampling in 2015. So what is that, 6 years since we fought?
Yes.
And so now, instead of coming back and saying, wow, we're finding these contaminants that are similar to the Superfund sites you've been complaining about, we need to do a much better job, we need to do more houses, they're coming back and telling the people in the community, it's the wallpaper paste, it's your shoes. It only showed up in the room where your shoes are being kept. Crazy stuff. It's insulting. And so what that means is we have to keep pushing and keep getting into action, rather than recognizing there's probably a problem and getting people out of harm's way and looking at these land uses. That area doesn't need to be written off as a sacrifice zone. It just means people might not should be living there. Maybe the better use for it is intermodal transportation, since we live so close to the ports. Anything besides people.
And you've brought with you today.
I did. I brought a very nice map. Let's see if we can get it here a little bit better to see a little bit. This is a map that actually a student who was doing her master's thesis on Superfund sites, and she put this poster together for us, but this is really about Savannah Story. It's on our website, www.delamoactioncommittee.org, and it's really a map of the story of our community, and it goes all the way back to World War II, and our community was actually built for the workers. We talked, before about the fact that a lot of the people who work in these polluting industries live nearby, and so Mallory Graves did a really fantastic job of taking maps that we had put together through our journey and getting it on the website, but matching it up with what the area was planned for. And even though I've been working on this site for over 25 years, she unearthed a lot of things that I really didn't know. I didn't know we were a planned community for the World War II effort. We have the synthetic rubber plant there that made tires for the airplanes. We had the McDonnell Douglas facility that made the airplanes themselves. So that's where a lot of our contamination comes. And so you have these areas that were used for the war, that it was basically the war effort. The good of the many outweighs the good of the few. Well, we're the few that are left living on top of these pockets of contamination. And Del Amo Montrose, for example, and the reason that Mallory was attracted to this area was because we have 2 Superfund sites there. These are sites that are so contaminated they're on the national priorities list for cleanup, and we get 2 of them. And so not only do you have the boundary of these sites where the contamination is, it's oozed off of those sites and into our communities, into our soils, and into our lives. We have children, Savannah, who this story is about. I was thinking she's been in the hospital for more than 2 days over the past year with asthma, where her lungs have collapsed and she can't get her breath. This is somebody who was born in this community. So it's not somebody who maybe has had an area where they didn't have air pollution growing up. This is what's happening. We're poisoning the children before they're even out of the womb, and then they're given this legacy of hardship, trying to recover from the pollutions. She still lives in the community. How do we save those people? Are they sacrificed?
Perhaps this would be, you could just tell us quickly, Florence, about the Montrose site. When Cynthia mentioned from the womb, could you address that?
Montrose Chemical was the largest manufacturer of DDT in the country and manufactured DDT at this location for many, many years. The company polluted their own property, the surrounding properties, the groundwater, the sewer system, and ultimately the DDT waste went out into the ocean and polluted the waters of the ocean. When you hear about the brown pelican and the risk of the brown pelican being extinct in California, you can blame that on Montrose Chemical, because their waste was in the ocean where the brown pelicans live, eat their food, etc. Montrose Chemical also produced a wastewater, a highly acidic wastewater, that went to another notorious site, the Stringfellow acid pits. And the water underneath the Stringfellow acid pits is still contaminated to this day by the Montrose Chemical waste. So they caused a tremendous environmental harm when they were operating, and we're still living with that legacy today.
Thank you, Florence. Thank you, Cynthia.
You know, one of the things that Florence was talking about was Jones Chemical, and you can kind of see this weird cutout here. This is actually the chlorine transfer station. So we not only have legacy wastes, we have pollution that's happening today, and since this is an area that's already polluted, why not leave Jones Chemical there, except for the Boys and Girls Club that's less than 500 feet from this facility?
Now, tell me what's significant about the area in terms of political will.
Well, on one side of the street you have the county unincorporated area, and on the other side of the street you have the city of LA.
And
So Del Amo is on the county unincorporated property, and Montrose is on the city of LA. So when you start going to bat to do something about the problem, you have to go to bat with the county supervisors, and then you have to go to bat with the city of LA elected officials, which of course is a whole separate large organization. And it makes it very difficult for a normal person going about their daily life to be able to connect with the people that ought to be able to make a difference.
so do you recall, I think you told me about an EPA meeting on one of the chemicals that you've got listed there, the DNAPL, and it was a public hearing?
Yes.
Were there politicians in attendance at that meeting?
No.
I don't remember that there were,
No.
And I think when you look at this area, people carve out their districts, or they're carved out for them. But I've been into congressional offices in the area where you can literally see the same cutouts. They're like, oh, I don't want that Superfund site in my district. And so you might have one representative of the toxic sites and one representative of the community. And we are in this county city swath, but when we first started and we were grasping with who are our political representatives, we actually had somebody from the Congresswoman's office come in to our clinical office, because we had a clinic at the time assessing the health of the community, and they argued for about an hour over whose district, and at the end of it, the one guy was like, oh my gosh, that is our district, and we haven't even known about it all these years. So there's these forgotten areas. And you go to the Board of Supervisors office and you go to those hearings, and it's like you're from some distant land. You're trying to talk with your 5 minutes or your 3 minutes or 1 minute, and they're up there having conversations with each other. You kind of want to wave a flag like, I'm saying something here. So it's almost like you feel like you're talking into a void. But we don't have the luxury of going and finding another audience. Those are the people representing us, and they need to be held to task, as my grandmother from Scotland would say.
Well, thank
And you know the area where, in Watts,
Yes.
where Jordan High School is, where all the issues have come up over the proposal for a new housing area there, that's in the unincorporated area. So you start looking at, is there a pattern here
So
where these undesirable land uses are left in the county unincorporated area?
I think we'll leave it on that note, with the unincorporated areas are suffering from the lack of representation
Yes.
in the political arena.
Yes.
And better land use planning.
Yes. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.